Alright, so today I'm going to share with you optionals. Optionals are actually quite interesting and I had a lot of fun reviewing it again. And I found out a couple new things to do with them and whatnot, so I'm going to share that with you. So what are optionals? Optionals are used to indicate whether an instance may or may not have a value. So you will assume when you look at an optional that it has a possibility of having no value at all. So it could be nil. That there's no guarantee that it will have a value, and so basically you're guessing as to whether it will or will not at any given point. So let me go ahead and show you how to create a constant declared as an optional. So we just do let, and we're going to create a constant optional. And we kind of set it up exactly how we did before, where we actually give it a type. But the thing we add at the end here is a question mark, where it's like, okay, there's a possibility that this might not contain a value. Alright, so how do you create a variable? Well, kind of the same way. So I'm going to create a name, and then I'm actually going to create this string too. It's going to be optional. But as you can see with the constant, it didn't automatically give it a value because we actually have to set the value. So let's try to set it to nil and see what happens. Alright, now it's set to nil. Whereas here, the variable already automatically became nil even before I set it to anything. Let's see if I could try to set the constant to something else, which I'm pretty sure I can't. And no, I can't, because it is a constant. Alright, so I'm actually going to set this to test constant. Alright, so here's where the fun kind of begins. It says, say if I wanted to print this out. I can't, because it does print out, it prints out nil. That basically is telling us that this optional has no value whatsoever. There's no string, there's nothing in there. So what happens when we do actually add something? Okay, so it actually prints out optional and then test variable inside. So basically this means that the value test variable is wrapped in an optional. It actually does look like it's wrapped. It looks like a little hot dog and a bun. So that's an optional that actually has a value. Now, the issue with this is, how do you use it? So I think the best way to show you is to use actually a number. So I'm going to just create an int optional. So it's going to be integer, question mark, and it's going to be equal to 2. So say if I wanted to do some math here, say if I have another variable, I'm just going to say a number, and this is equal to 3, but say I want to add an optional to it. Oh, we get an error. And what's our error? It says error, value of optional type int with a question mark not unwrapped. So basically what that means is, if you notice before I even put this in here, that the number 2 actually is wrapped inside an optional. So when it's in an optional, you can't do anything in it. It's like trying to add this to the number 3, which is not possible. So what do you do in order to get at that value? Well, you have to force it out. And how you force it out is you add an exclamation point that forcibly unwraps the optional. In this case, it's perfectly fine because we know it actually has a value. But what happens when it doesn't? Say if I set it to nil. We get a horrible error, fatal error, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. I kind of wanted to show you this is you have to be absolutely positively sure that that optional actually contains a value before it's unwrapped. Otherwise, it's going to crash spectacularly like this one did. So yeah, you have to make sure that it has a value, okay? Because it can be extremely dangerous. This doesn't look that bad, but if you are, programming an application or whatnot, and this happens, it's not going to be good. Or if you've already put something out there for people to use and it crashes like that, you're going to have some very unhappy customers, to say the least. Okay, so that brings me to what I wanted to cover next, which is declaring optional types. So the optional types I have been declaring so far are explicitly declared because I use the question mark. Okay, so that means that it's an optional and that's the way it is until you unwrap it. Okay, so I'm actually going to just move this down here because I think it's just easier than trying to rewrite something to show what I'm trying to do. So it's going to be explicitly declared. All right, and that means that we actually have to unwrap it to use it. Okay, actually I want to set this to 3 so it doesn't freak out. All right, oopsie, scroll down too far. Okay, so what's implicitly declared? Well, implicitly declared means that we actually have a value here that has a type, and we unwrap it. It is an optional, and it is unwrapped when it's set. So basically, I can use this variable immediately, and I can do whatever I want with it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably take this up here because it makes sense to see. Actually, I'm going to use a float this time. And I'm going to make this .3. Okay, and then I'm going to create another variable, float add, in which I will add float optional if I can spell float optional. All right, and I'm going to add it by 5. Okay, so right now I have it set as a explicitly declared, but when I implicitly declare it, what's going to happen is it's actually going to do the math, and you'll see when I print it out. It's actually going to completely unwrap it. We're not going to have the issue where we have right here where it's optional 3, or up here where it's optional 3. It's completely unwrapping it entirely without me having to force it. So if I type in float optional here, I'm going to see that it actually equals 3. It's not optional, wrapped. It's not optional. It's wrapped. It's an optional that's completely unwrapped. And so now this can be really handy and nifty to use, but at the same time it's extremely dangerous because, as you noticed before, when I had this equaling nil, say if I make that nil, it's going to crash. So you see, there's no check when I use it. It's just going to crash, and that's the thing you have to be careful about when you're using implicitly declared optionals. It's I'm not going to say it's best to use explicitly declared, but at the same time, if you use an implicitly declared optional, you have to be aware of the dangers. Okay? Alright, so let me undo that. Change that back so that it outputs. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you, that you can do an explicitly declare where we use the question mark, or you can explicitly declare an optional and it can be used immediately. Okay, so that brings me to, okay, well, yeah, you talk about explicitly declared, and being careful, and explicitly declared, and unwrapping it, and if it's nil, how do I know if it's nil? Well, we find out how it's nil by checking. And that's where optional binding comes in. We can use an if statement, but to check a value, and that's, I'll actually show you, you can't actually use an if statement. But optional binding actually tests the existence of a value first, and then if it's not nil, then it's implicitly unwrapped and assigned to a temporary constant. So it has a little bit more, it's a better little check, and yeah, and it's really nifty. Really, really nifty. Okay, so how do we do it? Well, let's go ahead and a good example of a optional in real life is people's names. Now, most people do have, a first name. I'm going to say Bob, just because it's easy. And, there's middle names, right? And there's last names. The thing is that some people actually don't have middle names. Actually, my fiance actually doesn't have a middle name, which is actually quite interesting. So I thought this was a really, really good, example of something that, may or may not actually have a value. And this actually does exist in real life. Some people actually do not have middle names. Okay, so I'm just creating 3 variables, first name, middle name, family, or given name, middle name, family name. I'm just going to do Smith. Oh, or small, why not? Alright, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to create a tuple that was going to be the full name. I just find tuples fun, and I like practicing with them. So, yeah. Okay, so I'm creating a label for the first variable I'm going to be using for the tuple, and that's first name, and then I'm actually going to do middle name as the label for middle name. I can't think of anything better than that, so it's not a problem. It's just a label that just happens to equal the same name as the variable. Alright, so, and then last name is family name. Okay. Okay, so I want to show with just an if statement to actually check the nil. Just so you can see that you can do it with a if statement if you want, but yeah, you'll see that optional binding is a little bit better. So let name equal full name, middle name, and we're going to unwrap it. And you see how I have to unwrap it? Whereas with the optional binding, it's going to unwrap it and really attach it to a constant. You'll see it's going to be pretty awesome. So I'm actually just going to print this out real quick. So name. I'm going to say with if statement. Okay. So you can see it's mapped with an if statement. So this actually outputted because it wasn't nil, it didn't actually contain a value. But say if this didn't contain a value, I'm just going to comment that out. You'll see it doesn't print at all. So same deal, it does check. Now with the actual optional binding, which is an if-let statement, we will actually create an if-let, and then I'm going to create a variable here, which is I was to middle name op. I'm just gonna do. It basically stands for optional binding, but I just want to show you. I just want an easy variable to kind of show you the difference. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make this equal to full name, middle name. Okay, and then brackets, and then in here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do print, and then you have a middle name of, then I'm going to do full name, actually, full name, middle name, and then forcibly unwrap it. Okay. Used with if let. Okay, so you see it actually does unwrap it and everything. So let's see what happens when we do nil. And there you go, it doesn't output at all. It's basically the same thing, just a little different. Okay, so now we can have a little bit of fun with this, with if let, in that if we add where with optional binding, we can actually add a layer of filtering where we can say, okay, we want this output determined by whatever value we're interested in or that we deem important. So say if middle name is equal to 4 characters that we say hello using their middle name. Okay, so we do if let, let's do char middle name, and then have that equal to the full name, middle name, and then I'm gonna do where middle, where char middle name is, and then we're gonna actually do a character count. We do characters count is equal to 4. Actually, we don't need these brackets here. Sorry, I added them prematurely. The brackets actually are after this statement here, and this is where it's going to actually print out hi, and then we're going to do oh, sorry, I'm looking at that error message. I realized I didn't spell it all correctly. Alright, char middle name. Alright, so it didn't output because up here, it didn't output because I didn't unwrap it. So full name, middle name, and then unwrap it. Okay, and it still did not output. Okay, what did I do wrong? Okay, so that's not the problem. Or if I just do hi, let's see if that does anything. Oh, I know why it's not working. It's because his middle name is not is not equal to 4. So actually, let's change it to 3. Okay, there we go. It says hi. All right, and see if we do char middle name. See what happens. It says hi, Max. Okay, there we go. So that's the problem. I make myself laugh sometimes. All right, so that's optional binding, where we actually use where, so we can, you know, get down to the nitty gritty of what we want it to do. All right, so the next thing I want to cover is guard else. Now, guard else is just as bad as awesome as where. But basically, what guard else does is it allows us to optionally bind an output depending on whether the optional is nil or not. But basically, we allow it to have an assignment occur, or it completely, absolutely jumps out of the statement. So, all right, so let's see how that works. So, say for example, we want to have a variable display name. So we're going to do var display name. We're going to make the display name a string, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to use guard to determine whether it has a middle name, and if it has a middle name, it will actually return the full middle name, so full name, so first, middle, last, and it will just say hello there. Now, if it doesn't have a middle name, then it's only going to output the first name and last name, because there is no middle name, right? So we'll use guard, and then let do temp middle name equal full name, last name, well, middle name, I mean. So we're testing for the middle name. We want to see that that optional actually exists, or the option as a variable, or has a value that actually exists. So we're going to do a return full name, first name, and then we're going to do plus, do space here. This is string concatenation. This, fall through, full name, and then last name, because this is going to be output if full middle name does not exist. If the middle name does not exist, it's nil. It's not going to output. It's actually going to jump down here and output full name and first name, because there is no middle name. And then I'm going to actually put a message in here that says, you don't have a middle name. That's unique. Okay. And then with guard else statements, we need another return, which will be the return where we have the full name. So this is where the name actually has a value for the middle name. Again, I'm going to do string concatenation so that it outputs in a very readable form. I'm going to use the temp middle name here, and then full name, and then last name. Okay, so what is error here? Consecutives. Oh, I forgot to add a plus. Yep, string concatenation. Gotta add that plus. All right. Okay, so when I print this out, I use this display name variable. Say hi there, and then I'm going to do string interpolation, name. All right. So it says hi there, Bob Max Small. Alright, oh, I forgot to add an extra space here. Alright, there we go. Now it should read a lot better. Okay, so it says hi there, Bob Max Small. Alright, so let's say Bob doesn't have a middle name, what's going to happen, it's going to say, hey there, Bob Small, you don't have a middle name. So, as we see, the guard statement will, well, if it's not met, it automatically pops into this return statement up here. Yeah, so that's guard with optional bindings. Pretty awesome. All right, so optional chaining. What's optional chaining? So optional chaining allows us to chain a number of queries into the optionals value, and then if all the optionals in the chain have a value, then it will succeed. So it will actually execute the code, otherwise it won't. Okay, so I'm actually going to use an entirely new example here, just because it's a little bit easier. So say we have a starship, and if you don't use the console right, it will output an error. All right. So let's create a variable. So we're going to create an error code string that will be an optional. Okay. And then the error code, we're going to have it equal the string of 60, okay? And then we're going to have a message. So error description, and this is going to be a string optional as well. Okay? So there might not be an error, there may be an error, there may or may not be an error description, it just depends, okay? So we're going to do an if-let the error, so we're going to assign the error to error code string. And then what we're going to do is we are actually going to change this code string here, which is a 60, to an integer. And so I'm going to do that all on one line. So I'm going to actually do error code integer so that I can do a conditional. So I'm going to change this to int and then enter error code string. And so basically what this will do is this is saying, okay, if I unwrap the error code string, and if it's an integer, then I will actually output the message, the error message. Okay? So I'm going to use a where statement here. And this is where an integer comes in, so I'm going to do error code integer. And this is where I'm going to say, well, if it equals 60, because now it's here it's a string, here it's a string, right? And we're actually forcing it to become an integer. So here we can actually do my condition where I want to see, okay, is the code integer actually 60? If so, I want you to output this error message. So print, and then actually, I'm not going to print it out, I'm actually going to assign it to the description here, and that's going to equal error, and then I'm going to do my dash, because it's an error, string interpolation, oops. Sorry, I'm going to do some parentheses, that'd be helpful, right? An error, and string interpolation, error code integer, and do carbon-based error occurring 60 centimeters from console. Okay. So, what is my issue here? Well, I forgot to unwrap error code string, because error code string is what? It's an optional. So that's why it's freaking out. Okay, so now it completely unwrapped and we have no error. And so when we print this out, the error description, what it should read is optional, error code 60, carbon blaze, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there we go. Now, optional chaining, what we're going to do is we're actually going to, this is the part where optional chaining kind of shines, is that when, as you see, it says optional, right? It's the error message is still wrapped. Okay, so now we need to unwrap it, and how we do that, we do var, and then I'm just gonna uppercase everything, so it's like pay attention. So uppercase error description equals, then we do error description. And optional wrapping is when you use a question mark, period, and then uppercase string. So now when we print out the upcase, we can see that it actually outputs the error message. Let's say if I force wrap it, see what happens. There we go. So if I force wrap it, it actually outputs. I wonder what happens if I do 50. Well, unexpected error. So that's why it's good we actually have the question mark, because that way, if it's an error, it still won't completely freeze over. So now it does output upcase error, but now it's nil. So that's the reason why we use the question mark. Okay, so that's optional chaining. Now, thing is well, is there another way that we can check? Well, we can actually, what we can do is we can do optional in place, which can modify an optional, and it's really helpful if you want to update a string that's inside an optional, and if there is no value in the optional, it actually won't update the string. So let's take our original issue here. Let's see if it actually exists by doing a modify. We're going to try to modify it to see if it actually contains a value or not. So we do upcase error description. Okay. And then we're going to again do the question mark, period, and we're going to append contents of, and then we're going to add something here. Let's say, please try again. Okay, so as you see, it doesn't do anything because our error code string is 50. So if we change it back to 60, it will add or append please try again to our error code or error description. All right, so that's modifying optional in place. So now, you know, we noticed that we have this nil, right? That is kind of annoying because, you know, we don't want it to print out when the error code is 60, or if it's nil, period. I mean, the error code could be nothing, right? Well, what can we do? We can do a nil coalescing optional. So basically a nil coalescing optional is kind of like a default. So it's kind of a default value, really. And so let's go ahead and create one. So how we do that is we do nil, so we do let, and then we're going to do description, equal error description equal error description, and then we're going to have it. Now the nil coalescing optional is the double question marks, and then we're going to put what our default error is going to be, or our default message. And so our default message is going to be no error. So if we output print description, yep, and it'll output no error. Okay, so there you go. What if it's 60? Now it will actually output the actual error code that the description was. So there you go, that's how you deal with a nil value. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit today. We've gone through constant strings declared as optionals, variables declared as optionals, optional types, whether it's implicitly or explicitly declared. We went through optional binding with if let, optional binding with where, guard, else, optional chaining, modifying an optional in place, and then the awesome nil coalescing optional. Alright, I hope that was fun and entertaining. Until next time.